The Economist. Hello and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. I'm Jason Palmer. Every weekday, we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world.
I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. I made my choice.
When I mentioned Dr. Hannibal Lecter, I'm using that as an example of people that are coming in.
More Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
What's at stake in this election? Whoa, it's packed with some stuff.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Donald Trump is an unserious man, but the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious.
As you already know, the assassin's bullet came within a quarter of an inch of taking my life.
We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity.
Well, folks, after a campaign that has provided one surprise after another, the exhausting run-up is over, and today Americans go to the polls, those who haven't already voted. This is, of course, just the beginning of the end, and guiding me through today's show is Idrees Khalloun, our Washington bureau chief and co-host of our American politics show, Checks and Balance. Idrees, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I am feeling like I'm on tenterhooks. How are things in Washington?
They are also on tenterhooks. People are getting a bit nervous about the election. There's a lot of security going up around the White House, a lot of new security around the Naval Observatory, which is where Kamala Harris lives. A lot of businesses are boarding up downtown just in case things go really hairy. And then for a lot of people, you know, this is their Super Bowl. They don't care that much about sports, but the election night is their moment to shine. And I guess I'm one of those people.
Okay, for a start, let's go right back to basics. What's going to actually happen today? How does the voting work? And what does Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris need to win?
So today is the culmination of basically weeks of voting. So a lot of people have been voting early, and quite a lot of people have been voting by mail as well. America does not pick its president based on the popular vote. What it does do is decide it based on the Electoral College. So every state has a certain amount of votes based on the size of their congressional delegation, which the majority winner in each state gets. So it's winner take all for all of those Electoral College votes, and there are 538 Electoral College votes that are up for grabs. You need 270 in order for Trump or Harris to win. Now, most of these states are really uncompetitive. There's no real mystery about where California's Electoral College votes are going to go this time around. But there are 7 states that are competitive that you've seen the candidates spend all of their time going to. There are about 90 Electoral College votes for grabs there. And those are going to be the states that we're going to be looking at most closely. I can probably name them all now because that's all I've been thinking about for the last few months.
Go on.
You have Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada.
And now in alphabetical order?
Oh, gosh. Arizona, Georgia.
It's okay. It's okay. Leave it.
So Joe Biden won all of those with the exception of North Carolina last time, and it is the same terrain this time around.
So there are plenty of Electoral College votes that we can kind of count on. There are these 90 up for grabs. That leaves sort of pathways to victory. Talk me through them.
Yeah, that's right. So for Kamala Harris, the most likely path to victory involves winning in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. If she wins those Great Lakes states, she will get to 270, regardless of what happens across the other states. For Donald Trump, his strength has been a bit higher, at least in the polls, in the Sun Belt swing states. So the most obvious pathway to victory would be for him to win Georgia, North Carolina, as well as Pennsylvania. And if he does that, based on what states we know will probably go Republican, that would get him to 270.
So essentially, both of those paths include Pennsylvania.
Yes, that is the most likely state to be what we call the tipping point state, which is the state that clinches it for the winning candidate. It has 19 electoral college votes. It is the biggest prize of the 7 states that we're talking about. It's why last night both candidates did a rallying there.
Tomorrow is election day, and the momentum is on our side.
And let me tell you something. Those drugs will stop so damn fast that your head will spin. And I'm not playing games.
It's why the poor people of Pennsylvania have been inundated with advertisements for the last few months. I remember when I was there, I heard a mailman complaining about the volume of election literature he was having to haul around.
So if I'm looking for a way to cut through the noise as the votes come in, are there specific counties I should be watching? What should a television viewer wanting to get to the bottom of this most quickly be looking for?
Yes, there are some counties that will be the focus of special attention. So in Pennsylvania, there are a few to keep in mind. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is in Allegheny County, are supposed to be the 2 big wellsprings of Democratic votes. But then there will be a lot of attention on suburbs. So outside of Philadelphia, there are counties like Bucks County, Luzerne County. In the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, there is a bellwether county called Erie County, right on the Great Lake, which went for Trump in 2016, Biden in 2020. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have spent time there as well. You'll see in Arizona, the big county there is Maricopa, which is where Phoenix is, and a lot of the surrounding suburbs. In Wisconsin, there's Waukesha County, among others. These counties might sound obscure, but I've been surprised. I've had diplomats get excited when I tell them that I'm going to Erie County because they've heard so much about it. So you will be hearing these counties in the coming days.
And somewhat overshadowed up until this point is that it's not just a presidential election today. The entire House, a third of the Senate up for election. Talk me through what the expectations are for that.
So right now, there's divided government. Republicans control the House of Representatives and Democrats control the Senate. The most likely outcome is that the Senate is quite likely to flip. Democrats currently have 51 seats. They're guaranteed to lose the seat that they hold in West Virginia, taking them down to 50-50. And they have to play defense in a lot of places, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and most worryingly in Montana, where John Tester, who's the incumbent Democrat, is looking very likely to lose. For the House, it's a different matter. So our forecast model very slightly favors Democrats to win the House, but in all likelihood, the party that wins the presidency will also command the House.
So ultimately, it's just as much up in the air as coin-tossy as the presidential end of things.
Yes, the cliche which will elicit groans if you say it is that it all comes down to turnout. But, Jason, I think it might all come down to turnout.
Thanks for that, Idris. We'll talk some more in a minute. Now, Idris, at this point, the presidential contest, as we've said, very coin-tossy. We've got 2 very different candidates, 2 very different visions for America, appealing to a very split electorate. What do you think, from what you've heard from your reporting, what Americans think is at stake for them in this election?
First and foremost is the economy. Voters say that is their biggest issue. And somewhat worryingly for Kamala Harris, they say that they prefer Donald Trump on that issue as well. Voters are still upset about inflation in particular. They have a pretty negative view of the economy given how well it's actually done in terms of growth rates. My colleague Daniel Knowles was at a Kamala Harris rally in Ann Arbor where he met some voters who basically wish the Democrats had a better answer on the economy.
Honestly, I think people just don't think about it properly. I don't think they do enough research and understand the economics of tariffs and taxes. And so,
aside from that, though, you see among Republicans a lot of emphasis on immigration. They're a lot more likely to say that is their top issue. Among Democrats specifically, also much more likely to say that abortion is at the top of their issue list. And that was another thing that voters told us in Ann Arbor.
And what are the biggest issues, for you in this election?
Women's rights. I mean, that's the easy answer. I mean, that's the big answer.
It's the first presidential election that comes after the demise of Roe versus Wade, which happened in 2022. So there is quite a lot at stake.
Well, exactly. And President Biden said earlier this year that democracy is on the ballot, something we talked about on the show yesterday. What's your take on that notion?
He's right in that Donald Trump's return to power after what happened on January 6th with his plans to undo the independence of the Justice Department, his plans to pardon those convicted of crimes based on January 6th, his plans to end the legal proceedings against him, all raise pretty serious rule of law questions that are the primary reason that we endorsed Kamala Harris as a newspaper rather than Donald Trump. But what we've seen is that although Joe Biden framed his campaign as a contest between autocracy and democracy, both here and abroad, Kamala Harris has de-emphasized that throughout her campaign. I saw a bit of this lack of certainty on Harris's part last week. I went to her rally that she did at the Ellipse near the White House in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, America!
There were 75,000 people who were there. It's a notable site because it was where Donald Trump spoke on January 6, 2021, before the mob went to the Capitol. And it's where he gave that now infamous speech, basically incentivizing them to do so.
Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant.
She mentioned that Donald Trump was a petty tyrant in the form of George III.
They didn't do that, only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
But it wasn't this stirring denunciation of Donald Trump and his threat to democracy. It was, a pretty bog standard political speech. And that, I think, shows that she does not think that it is the defining issue of this election, even though there are a lot of people who do think that this is the ultimate disqualifying sin that Donald Trump has committed.
A lot of what you said there kind of frames it from the perspective of perhaps a Democratic voter. What do you think a Trump supporter would say on that question of, is democracy on the line here?
They actually agree. They say, yes, it is. And the threat is coming from the other side. And what Trump supporters will say is that, look, Democrats accuse Republicans of wanting to weaponize the justice system, but it's only President Trump who's endured these 4 separate criminal proceedings. This belief also that the previous election was stolen, a majority of Republicans still believe that. And so to them, they do agree. But I think that the reasoning is a bit less founded than perhaps on the other side.
And as you already hinted, this is something that's going to be watched around the world. There are diplomats watching county-level returns here. And it's something our geopolitics editor, David Rennie, has been looking into, the international implications of a Harris or a Trump victory.
When Americans vote for a president, they're not just choosing their country's next leader. Decisions made in the Oval Office over the next 4 years will help shape the world economy, global trade and currency markets, immigration flows, and climate change. Unsurprisingly, the whole world has opinions about who should occupy the White House. Start close to home, with America's next-door neighbors, Canada and Mexico. In each case, America is the destination for more than 3/4 of their goods exports. Kamala Harris is less of a disruptor than Donald Trump, but Canada and Mexico will face new pressure on trade, whoever wins. Donald Trump promises to slap tariffs on any country that sells more to America than it buys from the US.
But the third most beautiful word is the word tariff.
Kamala Harris has also vowed to protect American jobs from unfair foreign competition.
While Vice President Harris has pledged continued support to the country, former President Trump has praised Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, calling it both genius and savvy.
Whoever wins the election will take charge at a time of raging conflicts. Donald Trump says he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Ukraine's fear, and Russia's hope, is that his plan is to make the Ukrainians accept a quick peace deal on harsh terms. And if that happens, some European governments fear that Russia's leader Vladimir Putin may test the resolve of the NATO defense alliance. And then there's the Middle East.
The Israeli military says its forces have advanced deep into the Gaza Strip. The IDF said...
Lots of American presidents have had a complicated relationship with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Donald Trump is one of them. But in his first term, Trump made some big policy concessions to Netanyahu. So if Bibi Netanyahu could vote, he'd be in a MAGA hat for sure. other big, influential countries, India and China, will be watching this election closely. India is just so vital as a hedge against China that it will be wooed whoever wins. Its Prime Minister Narendra Modi got on famously with Donald Trump.
My friend, India's friend, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris would be America's first half-Indian president.
So my mother was 19 when she crossed the world alone, traveling from India to California with an unshakable dream.
And then finally there's China, the most important foreign country that either president has to deal with. Who does China want to win? That depends on who you ask. For Chinese scholars and officials paid to worry about the Chinese economy, Kamala Harris is a safer bet, at least in the short term. After all, Donald Trump says he will dramatically escalate the trade war with China that he started in his first term.
China was charged by me hundreds of billions of dollars over the last...
But for Chinese leaders and scholars whose focus is the long term, their hope is that Donald Trump will make democracy look chaotic. He'll divide the Western world, weaken American defense alliances, and insult the global South. In short, it's not just Americans who live in partisan times. The contest between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris divides the world.
What about looking through that lens the other way, though, Idris? The degree to which Americans think foreign policy, foreign matters, other countries matter in this election. How much is that in their calculus when they go to the ballot box?
Obviously, there are a huge amount of foreign policy implications here, but Americans generally don't vote based on foreign policy matters unless there are American troops involved. And Donald Trump is certainly a lot more isolationist than previous Republicans. His supporters frequently talk about wanting to end endless wars.
I think that when he takes office, if he takes office, but I hope he does, I think that when he does, very soon, like the war with Russia and Ukraine, I think that'll be over, like, very quickly.
You see J.D. Vance in particular being on the further end of that spectrum, very, very different from a neoconservative Republican like Dick Cheney or Liz Cheney, both of whom have endorsed Kamala Harris over rule of law concerns. But nonetheless, that does show you a bit of how different this new brand of Republican is from the previous.
Now, I want to move on to something that is definitely going to be a concern to one degree or another, the notion of what happens after the votes are cast, the acceptance of the result or otherwise. Certainly back in 2020, that didn't happen. We know that election deniers support Trump, have run for office, have won office. The rhetoric around this has been ramping up for weeks. We can kind of already see it playing out. Do you think we're set for a repeat of 2020?
So here's a prediction for you, which is that Donald Trump will declare that he's won the election on election night, no matter what happens. I think I'm pretty safe in saying that one. I think that a lot of this will emanate from one side, and that's Donald Trump's. And so if he wins freely and fairly, which there's a very good chance that he does, I suspect that a lot of this talk about stolen elections will dissipate. If he does lose, however, I fully expect him to attempt every means, legal, extra-legal, to overturn the result. So this would manifest in court challenges, which I don't think would go very far.
What about on the street, the degree to which accounting officials, public servants of various sorts might be threatened, bullied, or people lingering around poll booths and being menacing, that sort of stuff?
I think it's a real worry, and it's a bigger worry than it was in previous elections. I've talked to elections officials who've told me that they're assigning flak jackets to some workers, that they're giving workers panic buttons to call the police. We've already seen ballots being burned in Washington. There was also an attempt in Oregon to do the same thing. There are some reports about poll watchers who are armed, who are basically menacing people who are dropping off their votes. That is not a good environment, obviously. I don't think it will escalate to the sense of mass disorder or a seriously disrupted electoral count, but it's certainly not the process that people hope this Democratic showing would be.
That's as good a time as any to hand things over to our colleague Aaron Braun, who took a tour of the vote counting facilities in Maricopa County in Arizona. Now, this is a place that has been in the news a lot, has become a sort of mecca for election result deniers. Republican-led Senate there called for an audit to the very free and fair result in the 2020 election. Even that partisan audit didn't show up any evidence of fraud. But this is a place that is very much under the microscope this time again.
You're on live streaming right now.
Oh, okay.
You can wave to your friends. 24/7, 365 days a year.
I'm in Arizona getting a tour of a vote tabulation center in downtown Phoenix. After votes are cast, this is where all of the ballots in Maricopa County are collected, and it's going to be staffed with hundreds of workers processing and counting ballots on Election Day and throughout the week. Jennifer Luer, a deputy elections director for Maricopa County, is showing me around.
So these are our high-speed tabulators that tabulate early ballots. And everything in this room is an air-gapped system. So as they're going through the tabulator...
About 60% of the 4.4 million registered voters in Arizona live in Maricopa County. And now this is America's largest swing county. And that means it's a place that people will be paying really close attention to on election night. Whichever candidate wins Maricopa County will probably win Arizona. Arizona used to be a solidly red state, but Joe Biden won it by about 10,000 votes in 2020.
The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get for the Biden campaign.
With a very close election comes a lot of attention, and not always the good kind.
Count the legal votes! We are watching you! We are watching you!
When Donald Trump lost in 2020, he tried to get local politicians to overturn the results. They refused, but candidates in Arizona continued to claim election fraud, and they do to this day. The combination of Arizona now being a swing state and its long tradition of skepticism of government have made it a breeding ground for election misinformation, and that could be a big problem this year. People feel a little bit on edge here in Maricopa County. At the election tabulation center, there's 2 layers of fencing, a chain link fence surrounding the building, and then a big black metal one on the inside. Security officers wait inside the building with metal detectors. On election night, the county plans to have a SWAT team stationed on the roof, and officers will be patrolling the perimeter on horseback.
And once our ballot drop box closes, then they come in and they secure the whole facility, because that's when we finish counting, when results are released, and that's kind of when we saw these surges of protesters in 2020.
Those cameras I saw earlier, those will be recording on Election Day too, so people can watch workers count the votes. The county's Republican Party is already collecting footage to look for instances of alleged fraud.
If we have very close elections, which I do anticipate, the networks may not be able to call these races for several days after Election Day. So I'm just trying to prepare people for that.
This is Bill Gates, who's on the county's board of supervisors, which oversees elections. He worked on the 2020 race too. Bill and his colleagues are hoping for the best, but they're also preparing for the worst.
That is unimaginable, I think, to me, before 2020, that we would have faith so shaken by our leaders. And I really, really hope that we don't experience that again.
The counting has already begun, and the first results will be released tonight. Then, the waiting begins.
I guess what troubles me a lot about all of this is, never mind this election, but for all elections going forward, the degree to which Americans have lost faith in the institution of voting. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the big long-term worry that might last beyond Trump himself. There's been a large-scale decline in trust towards institutions that Americans have had basically since Watergate. Trump has accelerated that dramatically by bringing the elections themselves into disrepute. A majority of Republicans still don't believe the last election was fair. And, even if the formal institutions hold for an election or two, ultimately societies run on trust. And if there's not enough of it to go around, I think that you create all sorts of problems that we'll be dealing with for decades.
In which case, I think we simply have to hope for the best at this stage. But talk me through it. If I am foolishly imagining I might stay up all night, is it worth my time?
Well, I will be, because it's my job. But I think if it's not your job, then you could probably skip it unless you need the blow-by-blow or you just can't sleep. If the election is as close as forecast, places like Pennsylvania and Arizona are pretty slow to count their ballots, so we probably wouldn't have a definitive result that night. But on the other hand, because things are so tight, if the polls are off by a point or two in either direction, it's very likely that one of the candidates just sweeps through a lot of these swing states. Our modeling suggests that there is a 50% chance that one candidate gets more than 300 Electoral College votes. Michigan might be quicker to count than other states in the Great Lakes. If one candidate is winning there by 2 or 3 points, then there's a good chance they've also won Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. If Trump underperforms in Florida, which is a red state that counts very quickly, that also could be indicative that he's in for a bad night as well. So there will be some signs, but I suspect we won't have a definitive announcement of who the next president is going to be until at least Wednesday.
And so, Idris, political junkie that you are, I imagine you're going to be glued to a screen of some kind all day, right?
Election day itself is kind of a weird period. You just have to wait for people to vote, and you know that you're going to be busy for the next few days. But in the hours before, there's not much to do if you're a reporter. So I like to take that nervous energy and channel it into making a lasagna because it is very time intensive. I started making the bolognese this weekend, and once you've done it, you have something to eat over the next few days, which is really, really useful.
Well, I guess I should say buon appetito then. For now, thanks very much for your time. I have no doubt we'll have occasion to speak again in the coming days and weeks.
Yes, I am sure this is not the last time we chat this week.
Like I said earlier, this is just the beginning of the end of the campaigns. Miles to go before we sleep. On tomorrow's show, I'll be joined by some more of the talent from Checks and Balance, our sister show on American politics, to talk through where things are. Meantime, you can find The Economist's analysis and up-to-the-minute results as they come in all night long on our website and our app. See you back here tomorrow.